They passed her the sniper rifle as a joke. No briefing, no warning, not even a serious tone. Just a casual handoff, like they were giving her a clipboard or a coffee mug. It wasn't protocol. It wasn't part of the drill. It was entertainment. A moment of levity in an otherwise tense, sand-covered afternoon. The weapon was longer than her upper body and heavier than anything she'd been asked to carry before. The sun glinted off the scope as it shifted into her arms, and a few of the guys chuckled, whispering to each other behind cupped hands. They weren't exactly subtle. To them, this was all part of the game. A rookie fresh from transfer, barely 3 weeks into her field assignment. She had no combat patch, no sniper tab, and no callous trigger finger. Logistics, they'd been told. Numbers, not notches. Pens, not precision. They wanted to see her fumble. She hadn't even spoken much since arrival, polite, quiet, observant. Always the last one in the chow line. The kind of quiet that makes people think you're soft or maybe scared. But she watched. Every detail, every move, every formation. She wasn't just standing there, she was absorbing. When they handed her the rifle, a few of them leaned against the Humvee, arms folded, smirks etched into their faces like they already knew the outcome. The spotter, a sergeant with a scar over his left brow, gave her a wink like, "Don't worry, we don't expect much." She didn't respond. No protest. No nervous laugh. She simply took the rifle with both hands, adjusted her footing, and examined the scope. The metal was warm from the desert heat, the bipod already set. They had made it easy, as if they just wanted the show to start sooner. The wind was unpredictable that day, weaving between dunes and dead radio towers. Any shot, even from a seasoned marksman, would be more luck than calculation. But they weren't expecting her to shoot. Not really. This was the military equivalent of handing someone a basketball in front of a full court and saying, "Let's see what you got." One soldier muttered something about betting she'd miss the entire berm. Another joked she'd probably shoot herself in the foot. All while she was lying prone, adjusting the scope like she had done it 100 times before. Still, no one stopped her. Because deep down, they didn't believe anything was about to happen. They thought it would be funny. Memorable, maybe. A story they'd pass around at mess. Remember when the logistics girl tried to play sniper? But what they handed her wasn't just a joke. It was a trigger. And she didn't flinch. She was underestimated the moment she stepped off the transport. Dust still clinging to her boots, bag slung over one shoulder, face half hidden under a regulation cap. Nobody asked her name. Nobody needed to. They had already decided who she was. Another pencil pusher. A supply run assistant. Maybe an admin officer out of her depth. She didn't fit the mold, not the one these men had built in their heads through years of combat and brotherhood. Her uniform was clean, her posture composed, and her silence unnerving. That silence, rather than suggesting strength, was taken as weakness. A lack of voice, they believed, meant a lack of experience. She hadn't been there when the rain turned to blood or when radio static screamed over live gunfire. She hadn't pulled wounded teammates through fire. She hadn't proven herself. But no one ever asked if she had. They judged her by her frame. Lean. Not small, but not broad either. Her gloves weren't worn in. Her vest too tightly secured. Her rifle strap adjusted for someone taller, someone else. They scanned her in a glance and filed her under non-threat, the way seasoned wolves might ignore a quiet bird. Everywhere she went, she caught the looks. Not hostile, just dismissive. Doors weren't held open for her because no one noticed her. She wasn't included in jokes, wasn't pulled into conversations around fire barrels or inside Humvees. She wasn't hated. She was invisible. In briefing rooms, her notes were more detailed than any of theirs, but no one leaned over to check. When her hand rose, eyes turned the other way. There were more important voices, louder voices, familiar voices. She learned not to speak unless asked. And they never asked. On the range, she followed the same protocol as everyone else. Safety check. Chamber clear. Eyes downrange. Her shots were tight, but no one took notice. The paper targets were collected by someone else. Her groupings weren't read aloud like the others. No praise, no ribbing, no talk at all. She wasn't invited to the card games or the late-night talks under the stars, where men traded tales of missions gone wrong and brothers lost. She wasn't one of them, and maybe they thought she never would be. One afternoon, a specialist asked her if she needed help reloading her own gear. Another time, a corporal offered to show her how to shoulder the recoil properly. Both meant well. Neither realized the condescension woven into every word. She answered with a nod and a tight smile. Not because she didn't know better, but because she did. A few joked she'd never see combat. Said she was here on some diversity protocol or high-rank recommendation. Said she was just here for the jacket and the credit. Some of them laughed as they said it, like it was harmless. Like it didn't matter. Like it wasn't shaping the way they all viewed her. They called her New Girl, Logie Lady, Supply Sniper. A dozen nicknames she never asked for. Never earned. No one asked about her past. No one saw the small tattoo under her glove or the number etched in her dog tag's second line. No one recognized the calloused ridge on her thumb where the bolt handle had once carved a scar. She let them believe what they wanted. Let them have their jokes and assumptions. Let them think she was harmless. Because the more they underestimated her, the less they saw what she was actually preparing to do. She didn't rush. Not when the rifle touched her hands, not when the whispers circled like desert wind, not even when the weight of every watching eye began pressing into her shoulders. Her movements were deliberate, slow, and precise, the kind of calm that only comes from discipline layered over instinct. She didn't smile, didn't flinch, didn't pause to acknowledge the half-grins scattered among the men. Instead, she dropped to the ground with the ease of someone who had done it countless times before. Elbows locked, knees bent, chest low. She slid into the prone position as if the dirt beneath her was a familiar friend. Dust kicked up around her, but she didn't blink. Her eyes stayed fixed forward, tracking the glint on the horizon. Just one shimmer among thousands, but it was the one she chose. She adjusted the bipod with 2 quick flicks of her wrist, tightened the stock into her shoulder, and ran her hand once down the length of the barrel. It wasn't affection. It was alignment. Precision. Muscle memory waking up after being tucked away behind rules, behind red tape, behind assumptions. The rifle was massive. A .50 caliber long-range beast that most soldiers took months to grow comfortable with. But to her, it responded like an extension of her own body. Her hands danced along its frame like a pianist returning to a favorite melody, fingers sliding beneath the scope mount, brushing the bolt, tightening the sling just so. She exhaled slowly, and the dust beneath her lips shifted with the breath. Inhale. Hold. Scope raised. The world disappeared. There were still men laughing behind her. Still someone nudging the guy next to him like they were about to watch something go wildly wrong. But none of that made it past her focus. The sound dulled. The heat vanished. Only the wind mattered now. The wind, the scope, the distance, and the shot. She adjusted the elevation dial with the lightest touch. Up 2 clicks. Windage 3 right. She licked her finger, held it up briefly, and felt the breeze wrap around it, not just cold or warm, but leftward drift, measured in meters per second. It wasn't guessing. It was reading. She spoke for the first time since receiving the rifle. Just numbers. Calm. Clear. Distance. Drop. Crosswind. She wasn't asking for confirmation, she was giving the solution. The spotter, now watching with slightly less amusement and slightly more confusion, turned to her like he hadn't expected words at all. She rested her cheek against the stock. Her eyes settled behind the glass. She blinked once, long and slow, then let her breath leave her lungs in a measured release. Her finger touched the trigger, not with hesitation, but with respect. She didn't yank. She didn't flinch. She applied pressure gradually, slowly building that final ounce required to let the rifle speak. The barrel stayed steady. The world was perfectly still for just a second. The kind of stillness you don't find in drills or in theory, only in the real moment before chaos. She wasn't shaking. Her heart wasn't racing. She didn't seem new anymore. Not nervous. Not overwhelmed. She seemed ready. And while others were still chuckling, still waiting for the recoil to knock her flat, still convinced that this moment was about to turn into some harmless, forgettable mistake, she remained focused, the crosshairs fixed on something no one else could even see. The shot broke through the silence with a thunderclap that echoed off the hills. It wasn't just loud, it was final. A sound that didn't invite questions. A sound that stopped mid-sentence laughter and turned faces toward the horizon. The recoil rippled through her shoulder, but her body absorbed it without falter, like she'd done it 100 times before. Dust exploded near her elbows, kicked up by the shockwave, but her eye never left the scope. A single round. One breath. One trigger pull. And then, the world stood still. No immediate confirmation came. There was no visible impact from this distance, no feedback from the target. Just a long stretch of nothing between the rifle and the far-off glint of steel and sun that shimmered in the distance. The kind of range that most considered impractical, nearly 2 miles of distorted heat and gravity working against every calculation. She stayed motionless. Her finger rested alongside the trigger guard now, her breathing steady, her expression unreadable. The others weren't laughing anymore. The smirks faded. Conversations paused mid-word. Some were still standing with their arms crossed, waiting for the joke to reveal itself. Others began shifting uncomfortably, glancing at the spotter. He was silent too. Then he looked through his scope. The same man who had smirked as he passed her the rifle now leaned forward, eyebrows furrowed, his hand slowly adjusting the focus ring like maybe he'd made a mistake. Maybe the numbers were off. Maybe there wasn't anything to see at that range anyway. Seconds ticked by. Still no sound. No signal. No cheering. Only the dry rasp of wind blowing over the ridgeline. Then he blinked. Once. His mouth opened slightly, as if words were trying to escape but couldn't find shape. His hand dropped away from the scope. He didn't move for a moment, and then, softly, almost too quietly to be heard, he said it. 3,285 meters. The number landed heavier than the shot itself. A few of the guys looked at each other in disbelief. One scoffed under his breath, like maybe it was a mistake. Maybe the spotter misread the distance. Maybe the shot was a fluke. But deep down, something was shifting. That number wasn't just high, it was near impossible. The kind of shot that gets written down, not repeated. The kind of shot instructors use as hypotheticals during advanced training. She still hadn't moved. The rifle rested calmly under her arm. She adjusted the bolt with a practiced click, her face calm, breath even. It wasn't celebration. It wasn't shock. It was routine. The look of someone who expected this. Who knew exactly what she'd done. The squad remained frozen, processing what just happened. One of the newer privates looked back out across the range, as if trying to even see where the target had been. He couldn't. None of them could. The distance was too far, the terrain too warped with heat to make out much of anything at that range. But she had seen it. Clear as day. The man nearest the spotter took off his helmet, rubbed a hand through his hair, and exhaled slowly. They were still trying to grasp it. Not just the distance, but the fact that it was her who made the shot. The same woman they'd dismissed as background noise. The same quiet presence they'd barely registered during briefings and drills. The shot hadn't just pierced a target. It had shattered an illusion. One round through every assumption they had made about her. The spotter's voice had barely faded when the silence swallowed everything else. For a full 5 seconds, no one moved. Not even the wind seemed willing to interrupt. His words hung in the air like the dust still hovering over the barrel. 3,285 meters. Not shouted, Not repeated. Just spoken with the kind of weight that settles into the chest and stays there. Around her, the once casual crowd began to shift. Arms that had been crossed in amusement now dropped to sides. Grins melted into half-frowns, half-stares. The men who had been leaning back with smug confidence now found themselves standing straighter, uncertain whether to speak or stay quiet. They chose silence. She remained in position, not from pride but from discipline. The kind of discipline that doesn't require applause to validate performance. Her cheek still rested near the rifle's stock, and her eyes never once sought out the approval of the onlookers. The spotter leaned back slowly from his scope, still blinking in disbelief, still absorbing the reality of what he'd just seen through the glass. His fingers hovered in midair, having started toward the radio before realizing he didn't have the right words for a report like this. His gaze turned to her, not with ridicule now, but with a dawning respect that sharpened every feature of his face. No one expected a record-breaking shot. No one imagined it could come from her, the quiet one with no combat patch, no dramatic entrance, no flashy stories. But now, the usual hierarchy, the invisible ladder of status, experience, reputation, had been shaken. The ground felt less stable, as if some unspoken rule had just been rewritten in the language of velocity and gravity. Someone cleared their throat behind her. A subtle sound, but it cracked the silence just enough to wake the others from their stillness. Movements resumed, small ones. Shifting boots. Adjusting belts. Fingers tapping against empty pockets. The nervous fidgeting of men trying to hide how impressed they truly were. The private nearest to the spotting scope whispered something to the guy beside him. Something about ballistics. About wind drift. About how that kind of shot wasn't just skill, it was math, instinct, timing, and steel nerves wrapped into one impossible breath. The other man nodded without speaking, his eyes still on her. They weren't looking at her like before. Gone was the amused indifference, the patronizing glances, the subtle dismissals. In their place was something heavier. A still kind of recognition. A realization that they had completely misunderstood what she was capable of. The man who'd cracked jokes earlier was quiet now. He ran a hand over the back of his neck and stared toward the range like he might be able to spot the impact crater from here, though he knew he couldn't. But that was the thing. They didn't need to see the hole in the target to believe it was there. The number said everything. The spotter finally looked up again, this time not at the rifle, but directly at her. Not a nod, not a salute, just a look. One soldier to another. The look given when lines are crossed, when someone steps out from behind a label and forces the room to see them for what they truly are. Respect didn't come loud. It came still. It came in posture, in quiet, in the way no one laughed anymore. Even the air felt different. Thicker. Heavier. Like they were breathing in the weight of what she'd just done. She stood up slowly, calmly. Not triumphant. Not smug. Just steady. The same way she'd knelt down. The same way she'd taken the shot. And this time, no one looked away when she moved. She didn't ask for recognition, and she didn't need to. The respect came not in words, but in silence, thick, undeniable, and earned. Every step she took after that shot felt different, not because she changed, but because the air around her had. No longer did heads turn away when she walked into the room. Eyes followed now, not with amusement or doubt, but with the quiet acknowledgement reserved for those who've proven something no one expected them to. The usual noise that filled the base, the laughter, the teasing, the casual conversations that had once ignored her presence, dimmed when she passed. Not out of fear. Not out of awkwardness. But because the illusion of who they thought she was had been shattered. There was no going back to jokes about her rank or her role. No one could unsee what had happened on that range. The nickname they used for her was gone. Just disappeared. As if it never fit to begin with. No one called her Logie Lady anymore, or Rookie, or any of the shallow labels they used to mask their underestimation. Now it was just her name, spoken plainly, sometimes with a little more care, sometimes with a nod. A real one. The kind that soldiers use when the mission is serious and the trust is earned, not given. In the days that followed, the spotter didn't talk much about the shot. He didn't need to. But people noticed how his posture changed around her. He didn't interrupt her during briefings anymore. He listened when she spoke, even if it was just a short sentence or a correction on a map. Others took note. When one man starts treating someone differently, the rest learn to watch closely. The ripple of respect began to move quietly through the ranks. She wasn't just the woman who made the shot. She became something more unsettling to the status quo, proof that skill doesn't always look the way you expect. That silence can carry weight. That strength isn't always loud or obvious. It can be measured in breath control and trigger discipline, in cold calculations and absolute focus under pressure. In the mess hall, chairs were no longer conveniently taken before she arrived. People made room now. Conversations paused when she walked in, not out of awkwardness, but because people didn't want to miss what she might say. Sometimes she still didn't say anything at all, but the possibility now held value. She no longer blended into the background. She had become part of the story, whether she wanted to be or not. One of the instructors from another unit came by days later, asking casual questions. Nothing direct, nothing official. Just inquiries about the woman with the long-range kill. The way he looked at her wasn't with doubt, but with interest. With possibility. Word had traveled. Maybe even further than she knew. Maybe farther than the shot itself. The target had been confirmed. Satellite footage. A clean hit. Center mass. No drift. The kind of documentation that gets archived, studied, referenced. Her name was now next to that record in the database, unmistakable, undeniable. Still, she didn't boast. She didn't strut. She cleaned her gear the same way she always had, meticulously and without hurry. She showed up early, left late, followed protocol to the letter. That, more than the shot itself, is what unsettled them the most. Because if someone that disciplined had been underestimated so badly, what else had they been missing? When training resumed, they didn't hand her a rifle as a joke anymore. They handed it to her first. The others waited their turn, not because she demanded it, but because they understood it had been earned. The kind of respect that can't be forced, only felt. Even the ones who hadn't seen the shot in person treated her differently. Because stories like that don't stay small. They grow. They travel. They become legend faster than anyone expects.